What is good, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video, and in this one, I'm going to be talking about the one and only Tesla stock and break down the Wyckoff accumulation schematics, the different variations of them, and talk about how this may actually represent what Tesla may do for the future. So, I'm going to break down some very important things about Tesla's current share price and future share price. I'm going to talk about what my forecast could be for the remainder of the year and also going into 2023, at least the beginning of it. I'm also going to break down historical data for the SPY and the overall market and kind of account this into my projections. And I'm also going to break down some other important pieces of information involving Tesla as well. Now, before I break anything down, before I get into any more details, I got to mention a couple of things before starting real quick. Firstly, I'm not a financial planner. Don't take any of this as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please smash the like button if you want to see more videos like this. It not only benefits me, it benefits the entire Tesla community as a whole. And the last things, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you're guaranteed up to 12 free stocks, each worth up to $2,000. And the best part is, any of these 12 free stocks could be free Tesla shares. It's a limited time offer. The offer ends in just 6 days. Check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. So, if you guys remember in my previous videos, I would often talk about how Wyckoff could actually help to encompass Tesla. And I want to talk about the two main schematics that we often see. So don't let the names and the fancy like symbols kind of fool you. This is a lot more simple than a lot of people think. So what happens is, firstly, we can't predict the future perfectly for Tesla and the markets because when you run an experiment, for instance, if you are doing data analysis or data science, you'll know that there tend to be many observations in the real world that affect data and what ends up happening. In this case, for Tesla's share price, many things affect it, from what the Fed is doing, what's going on between China and Taiwan, not to mention different policies, big things going on with inflation. So there's so many different things out there that will affect Tesla's share price. Predicting the future is basically impossible to do 100% accurately. But with Wyckoff, we could actually have somewhat of an idea of what may end up coming for the future. And this is why it's very important to be prepared. So the way Wyckoff works, if you don't know what this is basically like a pattern that represents how institutions dictate prices in these stocks and they start to accumulate a lot of these shares at these different ranges. So, for instance, stocks are falling like crazy. And what institutions do is they start basically pounding the stock prices down. When stocks come down here, they start to accumulate a lot of these shares. They start buying like crazy. Then they finally start to cover their short positions. They start to like buy in. They buy lots of calls. They allow for gamma, and we get a big squeeze like move or a big push to the upside for lots of stocks. Now, there are two main variations of Wyckoff. One of them, I mean, these are basically exactly the same except for phase C. So that's the only main difference between these two. All that happens is, in this second schematic, we have the low in phase B, followed by a drop in phase C, but it's not a new low, and then we push up. In the first schematic, we have a big drop in phase B. We push up a bit, but then we create a new low in phase C. So a little bit later as the year goes on, forming the spring, then the test, and the last point of support, and so on and so forth. So what is more likely to happen to Tesla based off the current events? I'm thinking that this is more likely to happen the second schematic, where Tesla actually kind of holds up. We start to basically capitulate and we get a big push near the end of the year. So I want to actually go over that possibility, but I also want to go over this possibility so you're prepared for what is likely to come. So let's actually break this down. So this is Tesla's share price. As I mentioned earlier, the two schematics are almost exactly the same going into like phase A and B. And it does look like Tesla is very close to entering phase C. So we're still like very close to phase A and B. And that's why I want to talk about these first. So let's adjust this real quick. Let's make this fit a lot easier. So for Tesla, you will notice that it appears that we did go through a lot of these phases in a very similar manner compared to before. So right here, I have Wyckoff. Right, let me try to make this as clear as possible. I apologize if the top is kind of like hiding. It's pretty easy to actually figure out anyways. So Tesla was dropping from its all-time high. We made the all-time high around last year. We also came very close to it earlier this year. But you could argue that either right here or right here, we saw preliminary support. In fact, I think it's looking a little bit more like right here, but you could argue either. It doesn't really matter. So we came tumbling down. You guys could see. What happened is we got a big push in volume, and then Tesla kind of got a nice bounce from here, and we pushed up like this. But then after that, we got a big drop, and this would be the selling climax. So in phase A, notice how the selling climax here and here tend to be correlated. Then what happened is we got a big spike in volume. Tesla pushes up to the automatic reaction, just like this right here. Then we come down, we have the sell test in phase A, followed by a big bounce and a new peak that formed right here. Notice how this peak is a little bit higher than the automatic reaction, very similar to this right over here. And you'll notice that what happens after that big peak is we have a big crash after when we enter phase B. So we have this peak, we come crashing down. This is the sell test in phase B right here. Tesla has the peak, big crash. Now we have the sell test in phase B right here when Tesla made the low. I'm sure you guys remember when Tesla crashed in May. Tesla made that low. It was pretty insane. As we approached the month of June, we started to actually reverse a bit. And since then, we started to push and push and push going into like August. Tesla started to retest this very key zone where we have resistance. And this is very similar to what happens in phase B. Then what happens is we start to cool off a bit and we enter this last point of support phase before we get ready to start rocketing to the moon. So the real question is, are we going to see this? Now, historically, as I mentioned on this channel many times, we have a tendency in the markets to come crashing down in the month of September during midterm election years. We tend to crash down in September, kind of find a bottom very close to the end of September, approaching October. Then we tend to push entering like the second week of October, going to the third and fourth as we approach the midterm elections. So the market tends to actually pump up during that time frame. It's very likely we get a move like that. Now, what's very interesting is the SPY came crashing down. If you guys remember, took a very big hit recently, and Tesla did not crash the way SPY did. Instead, Tesla actually held up these higher levels, which is a big sign of strength. So I'm not saying that Tesla is not going to crash ever again, but I'm saying that as of right now, we're showing more strength than the overall market, and we are resembling what would be happening during the second schematic of this accumulation pattern. So, what this means for Tesla is we could be entering the last point of support phase if this truly wasn't it. And I don't really think that this was it. I do think Tesla has potential to come lower, but we'll have to wait and see whether this was the last point of support or if we're about to form a new one. But we do have this gap down here. People have talked about how Tesla could go to the 240 to 250 range. Very possible. So let's go over the possibilities. So just ignore this. Let's put this aside. Don't worry about the spring, guys. Let's just go over this possibility. We're just talking about this schematic, by the way. So let's talk about that. So, anyways, what could happen going into next week is Tesla could actually bounce up a bit. And this could be kind of like a trap where we push up a bit, we look kind of bullish. People get kind of tricked, and then we get a big rejection off either like 300 or 305, and we come tumbling down for like another couple of days, another like week, and we fill the gap down here. That's very possible. And if we bounce off that, right, the market is pricing in lots of things coming from the Fed adjusting their rates to be a lot more hawkish. Tesla could actually bounce off this, and this could be the last point of support in phase C. So then going into like the first to second week of October, what tends to happen is we kind of like trade sideways for some time, for a couple of days. Then all of a sudden, approaching the last 2 weeks of October, we get a big rally going into midterms. The market turns bullish, and Tesla starts to push up just like this, for example, right? That would be very similar to what this is showing us. And then what could happen is we either saw the last point of support before and we approach the sign of strength after the midterms. Now, I don't know, excuse me, I don't know if we're going to see a new massive drop after midterms. That's also a possibility, but this could be kind of like our last point of support, especially considering we have another FOMC meeting coming. and with Jerome Powell speaking and so on and so forth. But after, we could see the markets pump if inflation does start to come down. I'm hoping we do see it slow down as demand in our economy is slowing down. I really hope that it really comes out that way. And the market is priced in a lot of damage already. So, with that said, near the end of the year, it's possible Tesla and the market start to rally really hard, and we see our sign of strength near the end of the year, and Tesla pushes all the way back to this zone right here, which would be the mid to maybe high 300s all over again. Then we get a rejection. We trade a little bit sideways for a couple of weeks. And then going into the beginning of the year, we get a big push into phase E. I know you guys can't see it. I'm going to adjust my chart to show it to you. But Tesla could slowly start to push up like this back to these highs. Now, I wouldn't expect this thing to just rocket like this, like crazy high like that. What I think could happen is it really depends on if the Fed really pivots, because there's a chance, many people have discussed this, that if inflation starts to drop really hard, then there's a chance that the Fed may have to reverse and start to ease up on their tightening and actually start to stimulate the economy again. So if the Fed bounces back and forth between quantitative easing and quantitative tightening, there could be many moments in 2023 where Tesla's like pushing up for a month, comes down like this, comes down for some time, then we push up again. Like, we're all over the place, but it's very predictable. But overall, I do anticipate with the Roadster, the Tesla Roadster, and not to mention the Cybertruck and all these big catalysts, we are going to push up again. And I wouldn't be surprised if before the end of 2023 we see Tesla reach $500. I would not be surprised whatsoever. It's very possible. And this is a more bullish possibility, right? But the only problem with this is the fact that we can't account for everything that's happening in the world, because this is assuming we don't get like an invasion of Taiwan. This is assuming that inflation does start to drop as we approach the beginning of next year, the beginning of 2023, or the end of this year. This is assuming that the Fed does end up kind of like easing on policies as the year approaches, the next year approaches. So we'll have to wait and see if that truly does end up happening. But this is very possible. And based off the current price action of Tesla, I do think this is very likely. And this is what I think is more likely to happen. But what would be a more bearish possibility? What is more likely to happen from a bearish perspective if we do get the big catalysts that are not good for Tesla? And that's why I wanted to actually talk about that, because I can't just promise you guys, oh, Tesla's going to run, it's going to be good. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know if Taiwan is going to be invaded or not. And that's why I wanted to talk about that. So let's just assume something else happens later on that the market doesn't like. That's when we could actually switch and use this schematic. So this schematic is a little bit different. As mentioned before, phase C is different. We have like the spring phase, the new low comes later on. And you could argue that since the run up we got, it is possible for Tesla to start respecting a slight downtrend. That's also a possibility if things do not go as planned. And what could cause plans to be disrupted? Some kind of event that hurts and shakes the markets, such as another war. That would not be good for anyone, any citizens. I wish that does not happen. But what would happen if we see something like that happen after the midterm elections? Let's go over the possibility. So, firstly, let me draw this out. A more bearish possibility would be we don't see the last point of support in phase C. We're still in phase B. So, this would look like this. Hold on, let me fix this for a second. Okay, we wouldn't have this. So one thing that's different in Wyckoff is sometimes phase C and phase B, these things could be very compressed, or they could actually be stretched out. So a more bearish possibility would have been like, okay, we push up a bit next week, we come down like this. Let's just say the invasion or nothing happens, and typical midterm elections get these big pumps. Tesla pumps up like this. What about after? What about after? What if we don't break past 314 going into like the midterms? And after that, something happens. The market drops a bit after the midterms. We want to start pushing up, and then all of a sudden, there's an invasion. All of a sudden, inflation is crazy high again. All of a sudden, the Fed has to be more hawkish. What on earth will happen to Tesla? Now, if the bears come in and the market is not happy about something that's like really big, then we could see a big crash in the markets, the real crash people are talking about, where SPY drops even lower than the lows we're currently seeing, a huge crash. And I'm talking about something huge, like Taiwan getting invaded. This will be bad for semiconductors in the USA. It's going to be very bad for Tesla, for Apple, and all these tech companies in the USA if we lose Taiwan. And that could be the catalyst that causes Tesla to come crashing like this if it were to happen, and Tesla could retest 180 a share. Now I used a Wyckoff accumulation schematic to find like 178. I'm sorry, not Wyckoff. I used a Fibonacci retracement for that because we did actually bounce, I think, like right here. Let me just point at it, like right here and here, around that 180 to 178 level. Tesla has gotten lots of bounces off that. That may be the true bottom. And I know we don't like to hear that. It's just a possibility. But after that, then we start to see a big recovery as the next year approaches. Tesla starts to push up. Right, we have the last point of support, big push like this, sign of strength appears, come down like this, and then Tesla turns very bullish after that, depending on the Fed. Inflation starts coming down, hopefully, and we could kind of like continue to move from here, just like this, depending on the news and so on and so forth. But you guys understand my point, right? So these are the two possibilities Wyckoff is basically showing us. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I mentioned the blue line you're seeing, the more bullish possibility is way more likely. Tesla's holding up, and so far we are not necessarily seeing what the world is kind of like on the edge for. I really hope it doesn't happen, but this is essentially what I think is more likely to happen in the markets, and we are more likely to see our last point of support right over here. So once again, guys, always be prepared for anything in the markets. Sometimes we could get these big shocks out of nowhere, which is why you have to always remain calm, cool, and collected, and watch the charts carefully, watch the news carefully, and hope for the best. Now, in my honest view, if we don't get a big invasion, if inflation starts coming down, we're most likely going to see a big recovery. We are on track for that. Tesla is showing lots of strength right now. It's not crashing the way SPY was. Tesla's not at this low level yet, or like currently, we're not at 200 flat. So I'm optimistic. I'm hoping we see a big recovery, but sometimes you never know. So, anyways, this is what Wyckoff is basically telling us about Tesla. Please remain calm, cool, and collected. Do what you have to do, and I'll most definitely see you guys in the next one. Tesla to the moon because the long term future is bright, and peace out.